Hello, hello, welcome. I'm Sophie, welcome to my channel. What follows is a vlog in which I read a couple of books, have some thoughts about them, and I share them with you. Voilà, simple premise.
Bibliosophie.
So, I'm reading right now a couple of intensely California and specifically Southern California, LA books. They are The Goodby People by Gavin Lambert, which I have to give back to the library in a couple of days, so I'm sort of prioritizing this right now. And one that I mentioned in a previous vlog, The Shards by Bret Easton Ellis, which just came out this year, and both are set in LA. The Goodby People, which I always want to read as The Goodby People, because I don't know, that's just not how I understand, how my brain understands the word goodbye, without the E, to be clear, is vibes. It is just true vibes. It is from 1971. This particular reissue has been making the rounds because it's quite lovely, especially when it has the sort of half jacket. I'll put up a photo which has pool blue waters, and yeah, it's just a very lovely object from McNally Editions. They also, the one that I see making the rounds a fair amount is They as well, but yeah, they're quite lovely. As I was saying, this is vibes. This is a lot of whole mood. We are following our first-person narrator as he has interactions with various LA-type people, California-type people in the very early 70s. Excuse me. The very first section is a very short kind of prologue scene, but the first chunky section is named Susan Ross, and it's following our narrator with in his interactions with Susan Ross, a California socialite, recent widow, and kind of it girl something, that kind of creature that is created in California in the 60s. I think this is going to be very much kind of California ennui. There is this like sun-soaked melancholy throughout, a lot of talk of loneliness, at least in this first section, and kind of connection or disconnection. It's very much a these are the people and things left over after the 60s kind of situationship, I think. Yeah, I'm quite enjoying it. I'll check in about it in a few days if I do end up finishing it before I have to give it back. I hope so. And I have been reading for about a week, I think, The Shards. This is my first Bret Easton Ellis. I have not read either American Psycho or Less Than Zero. I know about them. I have always steered clear of Bret Easton Ellis because he seems kind of unpleasant. I'm gonna say kind of obliquely. This has been getting some buzz. It's been getting a lot of positive and negative, but enough positive buzz from people that I like that I figured, hey, why not? Also, the setting is a prep school. So it's set in the early 80s in an LA private school, and it's a thriller. It's not great. It's really not great. It is not bad at all. I'm reading it and I think I probably will finish it, and it's a chunky one. I have read about half of it, and as you know, if you know me, I don't feel any compulsion to finish a book if I don't like it, and I do think I will finish this. It is kind of redundant. The writing, could be really, really cleaned up. And so I'm reading it very quickly because I can just kind of chew through passages. I don't need all the kind of repetitious mood setting writing that he's doing. I don't need the full track list of everything that is playing in the background of these scenes. There's something so deeply filmic about this in a way that is very self-conscious. It feels like I'm reading the screenplay of this book when it's going to be turned into a film, inevitably. And so he just specifies, okay, so Ultravox is playing right now, and they're playing this song, and this is the lyric that's going on right now. I get it. You're setting a mood, and you're setting a very specific nostalgia, very specific evocative look and feel. And I have to say, very successfully. I can really picture these people, these places, but it's too much. It's just edit that out after a while. I just do not need that much mood setting. This is a work of fiction. The book says so in all capitals at the end. This is entirely a work of fiction. Characters, events, and incidents are the products of the author's imagination. Except for the author himself, any resemblance to persons living or dead is mostly coincidental and not real. But that being said, we are following a main protagonist named Bret, who I assume looks probably like this in the mind of the author. This is the author when he was going to school in 1982 at the Buckley School in Sherman Oaks, California. This is set at the Buckley School. And then everything else, I guess, is probably fiction or something. So it's sort of towing the line between a little bit of an auto-fictional bent, but in a winking way. The main protagonist narrator also wants to be a writer. He is going to write books entitled Less Than Zero, for instance. At least one of them is going to be called Less Than Zero. So yeah, Easton Ellis or Ellis? So what is the convention when you have a three-named person? I guess Ellis, right? Weigh in. Yeah, do we call Bret? Let's call him Bret. We'll be on first name basis. Bret is playing along with, or playing around, I should say, with, narrative in a way that obviously I like from a lot of other people. Yeah, it's a mystery. We're at a prep school. A lot of rich kids behaving badly. And there's a new kid, and he's mysterious, and there are a lot of murders. The descriptions of the bodies that are ultimately found, that start to get found, is horrifying. In general, this is very, very voyeuristic. So if you are going to be reading this, strap in for a lot of horny sex scenes, which I don't mind, actually. Very horny. So horny. And relatively explicit. I mean, not as explicit as descriptions of crime scenes. They're not as numerous as the sex scenes, I'm happy to say. But whenever there is description of horror, it's a lot. It's really a lot. So it doesn't happen that often, but it was too much for me. And then I'm squeamish. I'm squeamish about violence. So that is maybe my trigger warning for you. I need to get started on my day. I'll talk more about this a little later. I'm having a hard time coherently putting things together. We'll see if I have to edit out chunks of repetitious. See, I'm being just like him. I need to edit myself potentially. I might not, much like I feel he did not. All right, anyway, check in with you later. Okay, how do I want to approach this? I'm almost done with the Goodby people. I have one last large section, which I'm gonna try to finish today, and I need to give it back to the library because actually it was due yesterday. Oops. I've really enjoyed this. Our narrator, first person, is very much Gavin Lambert. Lambert himself was a writer, screenwriter, novelist, biographer, who emigrated to California, to LA, to the Hollywood world, and was sort of in it, but a little bit peripheral to it, in the way that a lot of artists and writers are, especially writers and people who are kind of in the industry, but not absolute kind of fundaments of it. So he's writing very much from his perspective. He's writing, as I mentioned earlier, sorry about the plane, he's writing about what's left behind of Hollywood in a lot of ways after the 60s, the kind of morning after effect. In 1971, we open the book with pollution. Actually, the very first sentence is great. On a late afternoon in late summer, the air pollution count is 0.37, and sunlight missed the headstone of a star who was born, then died young. And it's kind of a perfect encapsulation of some of the themes of the book. It is about the end of old Hollywood, the kind of golden age of Hollywood, or one of the golden ages, the end of that studio system and the people left behind, and the kind of mood left behind after that goes away. It's a novel about, with very little plot, really. He just kind of encounters different people and is making connections, or attempting to make some connections with them. As I said earlier, there's a lot of underlying loneliness and rudderlessness from everybody. The narrator is a little bit of a witness to it. We sense some of his inner life, but mostly I think he is kind of the biographer of this cast of characters. The book is in 3 major sections. As I mentioned, there's a brief prologue at the beginning, taking place at the gravesite of a starlet, and then there'll be a very, very short epilogue as well. But otherwise, it's 3 major sections centered around 3 people that he has recurring interactions with. I mentioned Susan Ross previously. I think I talked about this a few days ago, who's a widow, and she is constantly disappearing, basically. She just calls on our narrator on a regular basis, and then he has some sort of interaction with her, and then she kind of disappears again. I was caught by a couple of different sections of that. For instance, this paragraph, she kind of disappears again. He says, "Yet our friendship was never quite real, more a platonic liaison with its exchanged letters, sudden appointments, and secret walks. So I did nothing, and was disturbed to find how quickly I fell into thinking of Susan as someone in my past. I suppose that was part of her character, too. In a life with so many gaps and flights and farewells, 2 or 3 months can pass, and the silence is unbroken, and the phone number changed yet again, and maybe she's gone forever this time, because she was so seldom really here." Which I hate, by the way. I hate that kind of interaction, but people are like that. And The end of the Susan Ross section is very much that kind of anticlimactic goodbye. They're on the phone and he asks, "Will I ever see you again?" There was another yawn. "It doesn't seem likely, I'm afraid." Then I thought I heard her laughing very softly. It's just like, okay. They just flit in and out of each other's lives. The next section is Gary Carson, who is a young draft dodger that our narrator meets at a kind of household of wayward, rudderless youths, I would say. And similarly, he's sort of there and then he's not. They start a sexual relationship for a while and then he kind of disappears. The narrator has this to say about him. So similarly, the lack of time, temporality in a truly understandable way is this feature, with also the loneliness and lack of true interaction with people. A few more weeks go by, carrying Gary back into my past and into his future, whichever direction he is farther away. So yeah, there's just this like constant sense of blurriness. Gary kind of makes a reproach about that to our narrator, about writing, in fact. He grinned again. "There you go, wanting words, wanting to make it rigid." And yeah, he's a writer. He wants to describe things. He wants to make things tangible and narrativize things. And these characters are unable to, unwilling to root themselves in places and people. I haven't read the last section, which is called Laura Chase. Laura Chase is I believe a fictional Hollywood star, but it's not going to follow her. It's actually going to follow a young woman who is kind of haunted by her, a young woman who also has a relationship with Gary. So there's kind of a mild connection between the sections and the people, but it's largely episodic. Yeah, I'll finish it, I hope, this afternoon. I'm really liking it. It's a very good exploration of a city that is teetering past its prime in some ways, or teetering past a prime, and the people left behind in it. So yeah, anyway, I'm gonna stop now.
I know. I'm Stuart, everybody.
Hello. It is Monday once again. I finished the Shards this weekend. What did I think of it? It was fine. Ultimately, the very short form review is that I think it is worth reading if you like this sort of book, and I have plenty of reservations. First and foremost, what I've already mentioned is that it is too damn long. At almost 600 pages, it does not need to be this long. I mentioned the almost needle drops of the narrative, how he just goes into so many musical examples at length. He does this with movies as well, with brand names. There's so much name dropping, basically. He gives too much context. The writing is not that interesting. I think it is itself too, what's the word? It could benefit from just truncating, really. Plot points become redundant. There's so many conversations that I feel don't really add to anything. because we are already getting the vibe of the characters. They are interesting characters with interesting interactions, but we see the same interaction happening over and over and over again, which I believe doesn't give kind of further nuance to the characters, but just sort of is the same. I feel like he's retreading the same things over and over again. The micro arcs of kind of getting into climaxes also feels a little off to me regularly. You could make an argument that it's just because the characters are kind of unhinged. Our main character, Bret, seems completely incapable of having any chill whatsoever. So when he is trying to have these conversations where he has suspicions about people and he's trying to figure out people and he's trying to get things out of people, and I just want to tell him, like, you're not going about this the right way. You need to calm down. It feels like he goes from 0 to 100 way too quickly in these conversations. Or similarly, when there's things left unsaid, sometimes it just feels like the writing itself is clunky rather than the interaction between characters uncomfortable. Yes, I think I would say it that way. The most interesting themes for me in the book deal with secrecy, obsession, and depravity. And the lines between desire, perfectly acceptable desire, versus dangerous obsession and depravity, and what kind of external perceptions have to do with that. Bret is in a relationship with a girl, I guess, in his class, but he's also hooking up with several male classmates. So he is, at the very least, bisexual and recognizes that in himself, or potentially will end up being just gay as he grows up. And he's hiding that behavior from most people. He has a tremendous amount of lust. I mentioned previously it's an extremely horny book. So what of that behavior is or is not depraved? Certainly his homosexuality is not inherently bad. Is the fact that he's cheating on his girlfriend bad? I mean, sure, maybe. Is his lust for his classmates unhealthy? Maybe. Is his obsession with some of his classmates unhealthy? Definitely. He becomes really obsessed with a new classmate, Robert, who himself seems kind of shady and he's hiding things. So we're dealing absolutely with unhealthy obsession, but also with perfectly acceptable just sexuality. And the trope of the obsessed homosexual is kind of looming over all of it, and I think is parodied by Ellis. I hope it is parodied by Ellis, otherwise he's just written another stereotypical obsessed homosexual novel. But it does serve as a sort of lens, the kind of necessary secrecy that homophobia, both internalized and external, force upon the characters, makes everything a little bit more fraught. But then there is this actual gruesome, truly gruesome, truly depraved desire that the serial killer, the trawler, is exhibiting. So there's this continuum of desires, needs, secrets. Where does what fall is a little bit up in the air, and I think it's a very interesting idea. We have in Bret a semi-reliable narrator. It is very clear that he is not quite right.
But in what way is he not quite right? Is he just driven to obsession because he's figured something out that other people have not? He sees something deeply, deeply sinister in this new kid, but is he right or not? We don't really know, and then I'm not going to give away how that evolves, but it does, I think, evolve in an interesting and satisfying way that is also gray unto the last moment. It's a book that delves in shadow interestingly and gray area, and with all of it kind of heterosexual cluelessness and distaste and homophobia, definitely, but especially cluelessness actually is a really important theme that kind of allows some of that secrecy and depravity to flourish. There's a desire for order that these privileged kids have, that the authorities have, a desire for the status quo that allows for darkness to flourish, I would say. Yeah. I'll stop there. That's various thoughts on a basically successful book that I would write differently. But, you know, you can't read a Bret Easton Ellis book expecting it to not be a Bret Easton Ellis book. And this is my first one, but even I know that you're signing on for too much. He is a too much character and a too much writer. So I do have to allow that. I picked up his book and I do need to operate kind of in his world to some extent. Yeah. So at this point, I am going to wrap up the vlog. If you've read either of these books, I would love to know what you thought of them, probably especially the Shards, because I think that's bound to be more polarizing. Bret Easton Ellis in general is going to be more polarizing with people. I was originally intending to add a list of other books that I feel really capture something about California, different Californias, but I tried to film that and I just did not have it in me to do so. I was doing this yesterday and I just couldn't get through it. So I'm gonna give myself a break. I'm not going to film that list because I do have it. However, I'm gonna put it in the video description. Let me know what you've read, what you think I'm missing. There are definitely some notable absences in that list that I thought of. It's not meant to be exhaustive by any stretch, but yeah, let me know. What are your California books? Thank you for watching and see you in the next one. Ciao.